It was another day of war in Europe as a German freight train slowly crossed the Swiss border. There were no soldiers cheering and no flags waving, yet inside those wagons lay something more powerful than weapons. Each carriage carried a fortune, not in documents or food, but in gold, tons of it, stamped with the eagle of the Reich, but born in the vaults of foreign nations. This wasn't just treasure. It was the lifeblood of the Nazi war machine. Without this shipment, the factories would stop, the panzers would run dry, and the war would end. But because of this train, and hundreds like it, the fighting continued. To understand how this happened, we must uncover where this gold came from, how it was moved in plain sight, and where it finally disappeared. To understand the gold, you first have to understand the bankruptcy. By 1939, Nazi Germany was a military superpower but a financial corpse. Hitler had spent nearly every pfennig of the National Reserve building the Wehrmacht, leaving the regime with tanks but no foreign currency. In the global market of 1939, the German mark was worthless paper. Yet to buy oil, tungsten, and rubber from neutral countries, Germany needed hard assets. They needed gold, so they stole it. It started with the Anschluss of Austria in 1938. The Nazis didn't just annex the territory, they marched straight into the Austrian central bank and emptied the vaults, shipping over 90 tons of gold to Berlin overnight. This was merely the appetizer. As the Blitzkrieg rolled across Europe, a dedicated financial unit followed the tanks. In Czechoslovakia, they seized 45 tons. In the Netherlands, they cracked the vaults of the Dutch central bank, looting over $190 million worth of gold, a staggering sum in 1940. But the biggest prize was Belgium. Through a complex political betrayal involving the French Vichy government, the Nazis seized nearly 220 tons of Belgian gold that had been sent to Africa for safekeeping. They shipped it back across the desert, across the Mediterranean, and into the Reich Bank. By 1942, Berlin sat on a mountain of stolen bullion. Estimates suggest the Nazis looted over $600 million in gold from occupied Europe, which, adjusted for inflation, would be nearly $6 billion today. However, there was a problem. Everyone knew the gold was stolen. If Germany tried to pay Portugal for tungsten using Belgian gold bars, the transaction would be blocked. The gold was dirty, and to clean it, they needed a banker who didn't ask questions. This is where the story turns from armed robbery to sophisticated money laundering. Between 1942 and 1944, the rail lines between Germany and Switzerland became the most valuable arteries in the world, with armored trains heavily guarded by the SS running regular routes into Bern. The process was industrial. First came the washing. The Reichsbank took the stolen gold bars, stamped with Dutch, Belgian, or Austrian seals, and melted them down, recasting them into new bars stamped with pre-war dates like 1938 to effectively erase the history of the metal. Once the trains arrived in Bern, the gold was deposited into the vaults of the Swiss National Bank, SNB, which acted as a fence. The SNB bought the gold from Germany and, in return, provided the Nazis with Swiss francs. This was the magic trick. The Swiss franc was the only major currency in Europe that was still convertible and respected globally. Suddenly, the Nazis didn't have stolen Belgian gold. They had clean Swiss cash. They used these francs to pay Sweden for iron ore, Turkey for chrome, and Portugal for wolfram. The Swiss National Bank knew exactly what was happening. Records show that Swiss officials were aware the Reichsbank's own reserves had been exhausted years prior, meaning this new influx could only be loot. But the logic of neutrality was cold. Switzerland argued they needed to trade to survive while surrounded by Axis powers. They charged fees, kept a portion of the gold, and ensured their economy remained stable while Europe burned. In total, it is estimated that 75 to 80% of all German gold exports went through Switzerland. The Swiss washing machine turned billions of dollars of plunder into the raw materials that kept the war dragging on for 2 extra years. When the Reich collapsed in 1945, the train stopped running. American soldiers eventually discovered the Merkers salt mine in Germany, a cave filled with bags of gold, art, and cash. But that was simply what the Nazis failed to move in time. The real question was where the rest had gone. The Allies formed the Tripartite Gold Commission to recover the loot and return it to the victim nations, turning their gaze immediately toward Switzerland. In 1946, under immense pressure, Switzerland signed the Washington Agreement, agreeing to pay 250 million Swiss francs to help reconstruct Europe. At the time, they claimed this settled the debt. Adjusted for inflation, that payment equals roughly 3 to 4 billion US dollars today. But even then, the math didn't add up. Decades later, investigations like the Volcker Commission in the 1990s cracked open the archives. They found that more than 440 tons of Nazi-linked gold had passed through Swiss banks during the war. At today's gold prices, that amount alone would be worth over 30 billion US dollars. Even worse, they uncovered the so-called Melmer accounts, gold not taken from central banks, but from the victims of the Holocaust. Gold teeth, wedding rings, and personal valuables melted down and merged into official Reichsbank bullion. This revelation forced a global reckoning. Swiss banks eventually agreed to settlements exceeding 1.25 billion US dollars, a figure that represents only a fraction of the total value involved. When adjusted for inflation and unrecovered assets, historians estimate the true financial scale of Nazi gold laundering to exceed $50 billion in today's terms. Yet huge amounts remain unaccounted for. Some of the gold flowed into Portugal and Spain and was never returned. Some was quietly absorbed into post-war financial reserves, and some is almost certainly still sitting in private vaults, resmelted, re-stamped, and completely untraceable. Today, that gold is no longer marked with swastikas or serial numbers. It lives inside the global financial system, hidden in jewelry, electronics, central bank reserves, and bullion stored in London or New York. The gold lost its history, but it kept its value. We will never know the exact ounce count, but we know the cost. The war ended, the train stopped, but the money never truly disappeared.